I've worked in the accessibility field for, geez, coming up on 10 years now. And in that time, I've worn what feels like a bunch of White Sox hats, but a bunch of different hats, from mobile accessibility to web accessibility to automation expert. And so I've covered a multitude of different grounds, and I'm really excited for this talk today, talk through ARIA and how the misuse of it is really hurting the web community and the accessibility community in general. So before we take a big deep dive into semantic and native HTML. Let's talk through what it means to have HTML in general, right? So HTML introduces meaning and purpose to a web page rather than just presentation, right? And sometimes in the community, we use semantic and native HTML interchangeably, right? Semantic HTML refers to the use of HTML elements that convey meaning about the content they contain, both to the browsers and to the developers, right? Native HTML refers to the standard built-in accessibility elements that are part of the official HTML specification and supported directly by web browsers, right? Now, a lot of times, and through this presentation, you'll hear me say it too, I'll interchange those two things, right? But when we're talking about it, we're just talking about HTML that conveys in meaning and purpose, okay? So a couple of examples. What is semantic and native HTML, right? So let's talk about HTML that conveys meaning or purpose, right? A button. What is a button? It's an action. If I hear button, if I'm using assistive technology, I know it has an action associated with it, right? If I hear input, I'm going to be able to type, do some type of input along the way. H1, H2, so headings, probably chunks of content broken up on a page that I can get to really quickly with assistive technology. A header and a navigation, semantic content that breaks up my page logically so I know where I'm at on the page, right? Those things convey meaning, right? But there's a use of HTML that doesn't convey meaning, that's more for organization of a page or the content that's on it, right? So a div. A div is just a container, let's be real, right? That allows us to kind of put the pieces in play for us from a screen and put it in a nice format. A span, right? More for text content. A B or an I, right? A bold or an italics, right? These things don't convey meaning or purpose to us, right? They're just there to help formulate a page along the way. So starting back out, what is ARIA? I'm sure a lot of you on here know what ARIA is, but I have to level set to start with as we get going. So ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It's a set of role of attributes that define ways to make web content and web applications more accessible. It's especially prevalent for those developed in JavaScript frameworks, right? Knowing that definition and reading it straight up, you might say, cool, this is more stuff to help make the world more accessible. Like, let's go. That's fantastic, right? Well, the true purpose of ARIA is to supplement and enhance HTML. Let me say that one more time. Supplement and enhance HTML so that specific interactions and widgets can be properly passed to assistive technologies. ARIA enables creation of accessible items like status messages, error messages, live content updates, and then some custom widget support, right? But remember that supplements and enhances HTML piece, because I'm going to come back to it about 10,000 times during this talk. So if you want a practical example of ARIA, something that we would actually use it and actually run with it, it's status message, right? So for example, if I have a div, inside that div, I have a heading that says you are now logged in and a paragraph tag that says you may now search for lightsabers. I can put a role of region and ARIA live assertive, and that will read to a screen reader. That's a practical way of using it, right? Now, yes, I'm using divs here, but it is a practical use for it to get a status message announced to a screen reader. And expand collapse. I'm using a native element of a button, and I have ARIA expanded equals false on it. I can use ARIA expanded true, false to be able to showcase open and close, right? And I'm also have ARIA controls of the widget, so which widget is controlling, and the div content down below, which says more information on buying a lightsaber, okay? So those are practical examples of using ARIA. And in these cases, it is supplementing and enhancing what's already there from an HTML perspective, right? We're not using it to build something out from scratch that already is there from a native standpoint. We're using it to enhance the accessibility of our site. That is the practical purpose of ARIA. Now, I love talking about this because In the accessibility sphere and across the world, you will hear the first rule of ARIA. And I have to use the Fight Club meme in this for it. But the first rule of ARIA is don't use ARIA. And everybody across the board, I mean, I think when I got into this field all of 10 years ago, that was like the number one thing. Everybody said don't use ARIA, right? Let's make a more practical example of it. Don't use ARIA unless there is a way to use a native or semantic HTML element first, right? The use of ARIA attributes is 100% necessary to convey proper meaning to assistive technologies when you use semantic and native elements to build upon it, right? That is a big key. Yes, ARIA is out there and it's misused like crazy. We're going to walk through a whole scenario with that here in just a second. But the first rule of ARIA, don't use ARIA, well, it's don't use ARIA unless, right? And so if we think about it in that terms and say, unless there's a way to use native and semantic elements, and then I go back to, I supplement and enhance, right? To make it better or to add more, convey meaning to it more, we're using ARIA, then I can use ARIA, right? So I know a lot of times we'll see the first rule of ARIA out there, but do know, right? It does have a practical purpose, but making sure we use it in the right way is the key, all right? So with that though, Mark's just going to sit up here the whole entire day and say, oh my gosh, Mark's talking about don't use ARIA but unless. Okay, now we're to the problem. Okay, so the problem. ARIA in the current world of web development. When I got asked to do this talk, I was like, is this going to be relevant still? Like, is all these pieces we're talking about still relevant from an accessibility perspective? And oh boy, yeah, it still is. So let's talk about the problem. ARIA and current web development. Web development nowadays is mostly done in JavaScript frameworks or some other type of library that, let's be honest, is built on a JavaScript framework behind the scenes. That has placed the focus on learning the main functionality of those frameworks instead of the basics of HTML. I can tell you all a story about this that really hits that point home. When I was looking up some university classes across the board, so this is educating the next generation of developers for what they need. The amount of college courses, online courses that are specifically focused on React, Angular, Vue is unreal. And in all of those, if you look at what they do in those classes, none of it starts with the basics of web, which is HTML as a foundation. None of them do. So what we end up with is we see developers that are strictly looking at it as I need to get myself leveled up for the real world. I need to learn JavaScript frameworks, right? So now all of those basics are completely left behind. All the foundational pieces that myself, others way before me had learned of HTML, JavaScript, how to build out proper content, and how to use those things to make a better web page and a website are out the window in lieu of trying to get people to learn a JavaScript framework. So what we see more now is developers using ARIA to fill gaps and make their content accessible instead of just using the basics, because the basics aren't being brought to the forefront anymore. They're being pushed to the background to get things in play like the JavaScript frameworks and the different frameworks that are out there. So a scary trend is the use of ARIA only for making content accessible, which I have coined the term of ARIA first development, but it's true, right? Developers are going towards ARIA first because I call it div soup, but it's the truth. The amount of code that's out there that's strictly built in divs and spans using CSS and ARIA to try to make some div soup into accessible content is unreal. So ARIA first development is a big key. Now, what are some of the reasons for that, right? It's kind of difficult to pin down exactly what the reason is for that. But if you look at it, there's complex UX designs that come through, right? But developers, instead of asking back of how they should build these things out, are just taking them and saying, well, I got this complex design. I'm just going to build it out the way that I need to say, hey, I need to get this made. I'll make it with a bunch of divs to make it look exactly like what I got. No, there's no conversations being had back about what they could do to build that out. Use of component frameworks, right? We talked about JavaScript frameworks, but let's go farther down the matrix here and say, there's component frameworks out there too, entire design system libraries that you can just literally do npm install, so node install of, and pull all of that content into your project, whether you're using React, Angular, or Vue. So if I can pull those all in, how do I know accessibility has been baked into those or not? I don't, right? The other one is HTML isn't important anymore. Back that previous statement, and this one stings me to say, but I've heard this directly from developers' mouths over the years, is HTML isn't important anymore. What's important is the way that we build applications through JavaScript and through the data pieces that we can do behind the scenes, right? HTML is important. I can just make a bunch of divs, make my content look the way I want, and it's great, right? Pains me to say that, but those are realities of what other developers in the world are saying, right? Because of that focus from foundational pieces to I got to get into the latest JavaScript framework. So what is left is a giant mess of ARIA that is either incorrect, difficult to understand, or leaves developers completely confused on what they've built and what's required from an accessibility perspective, right? Without the foundational pieces in place of why you would need to use a button versus a div that has role equals button, tab index of 0, all the pieces to it, without that, developers don't understand the basic foundations of how to build something in web accessibly, right? And so those being stripped out, we end up in a giant mess of ARIA. But I can sit up here all day and talk through, well, here's all the different things that I see in the accessibility community and all the development community. Let's actually talk through them. So this is my favorite part of this because I'm going to share very personally. This is a story that I actually have personally witnessed in my career when I was a developer early in my career. And this scenario repeats itself over and over and over and over in development timeframes. And so I want to use this scenario to go through a modern web development team using an ARIA first development approach. All right. So let's give a scenario. Let's give some background for it. Let's say there's a development team that develops in a JavaScript framework like React or Angular or Vue. In this case, it's more React based, and is tasked with creating a brand new web component. All right. The developers in the team house a library of components that the entire company uses every single day. So call it a design system if you want to. They are under pressure to get each iteration done in a sprint. That sprint timeline is a week, right? Very standard, very typical scenario where I want to get stuff out the door. I got requirements. I got to go. Okay. So my team gets this tiny component. We got our first iteration, the initial requirements for this. The team is tasked with creating a simple product description component that contains the following: the title of the product, a photo, and a select item button, right? The focus is just getting data from the back end to the front and making sure the data is dynamically placed within the component. Sounds very simplistic, right? And just so everybody's painstakingly aware, yes, this will be a Star Wars seminar as well as we go through because I love using Star Wars as examples for my inaccessible stuff. So iteration 1, okay? I will describe what I've got from the iteration. So I have a screenshot up top. On the far left, I have a lightsaber picture with a green border around it. In the middle, I have a bolded text that says Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber. And on the far right, I have a green button with white text that says select item. Okay? So you all may be seeing that and saying, wow, that is such a simplistic component, Mark. Like, all right, how could it possibly go wrong? Well, let's talk through some of the code. I have the code up on the screen here, but let's talk through this developer who picked this up, shall we? Because this is my favorite part when it comes to this. So this developer, newer to the field, newer to web development, they go out and search something like Stack Overflow, or now that we're this piece, I haven't done this talk in a long time, they use an AI agent and they say, I need to make something like this, give me the results. So what they do is they start to copy and paste some of the containers, some of the content they find online, and kind of piecemeal this stuff together to where they kind of have just a giant conglomerate of on the page, right? But guess what? It looks shiny. It does what it's supposed to do, right? But let's dive in, even to start with, the issues that has happened so far. So they go to the site or the AI agent and they copy and paste code. And the code itself right now, let's look at this button. It's a div. Yes, it has roll equals button. Yes, it has tab index of 0. Fantastic. All right, sweet. But when he copied over the code, he also took over a code that said ARIA label, and the ARIA label says select item button, but it already has a roll button. So now I got a button. Sweet. I also have an ARIA label on something that has select item text already there. So now I'm overriding that label with the incorrect addition of button. Okay, 0 for 2. But on top of that, in using a div with tab index of 0, we have an onClick event. Because again, if you go generally search, everyone will be like, onClick works with everything. Well, I'm not using a native button, so I don't have an onKeyDown event tied to this, so this is probably not going to work with keyboard by default. So already, we're 0 for 2, 0 for 3, right? Now, to you all listening on here and looking at the code that's on here too, we might think, well, Mark, that's really simplistic, right? Those fixes could be made. We could change it to a button, all of that, right? But again, this is a team that doesn't have an accessibility code mindset first or a native and semantic HTML mindset first. So this is what we start with. The code's committed. And hey, it looks great. I can get to the things I need to. Everyone's going to be satisfied. Let's go. Okay. So we get through iteration 1. And that's our coding issues. Now remember those issues, specifically the div and the button, because they will come back here. So iteration 2 comes in. Feedback has been given on the initial implementation that was done. So new requirements have come in. Developers have been tasked with adding the following: a title to the product that's styled as a heading instead of just like bolded text. This includes a horizontal break underneath it to kind of separate them out. And the list of details and highlights of the product underneath that. So it would kind of be like a heading and then details of it underneath. The focus coming from the requirements is that it needs to look great and it needs to give more details. Okay, great. So we get those requirements, we build it out, and we say, ta-da! So now my finalized product still has the lightsaber on the left with the image. Now I've got much better text that looks like Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber as a heading, an HR horizontal row underneath, and then a list of 3 descriptors underneath. So example, fully metal handle, blue kyber crystal included, will make you say hello there all the time because it's Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber. Directly underneath that heading. And on the far right, I still have the select item on there. Okay, so now let's look at the developer's code. As I'm talking through this, even I'm looking at it and going, whew, okay, this is getting a bit much. It's starting to get bigger. It's starting to get more expansive. Why? Well, if you look at, let's start with the Obi-Wan Kenobi lightsaber. Okay, so the text that comes through. So I am using a span, which is what I had before. And now I'm just going to add a class that says heading, because you know what? That CSS is tied to that, right? That CSS is tied to that class of heading with span. So I'm going to use that so it bolds it out, makes it look nice. And I'll add a roll heading and an ARIA level 3. Okay, those listening, nothing's wrong with that per se, right? It's still going to read as a heading that comes through. Maybe the ARIA level is incorrect based on where it's at in the page, but there's nothing wrong with that, right? Okay, so then let's look at the next piece, which was adding in the list of items underneath. My developer decided to use a section, which, oh, hello, we use semantic elements and native elements. That's weird. But we add a class of list and then a roll of list. So I get the styling I want, but I don't use an OL or UL for some reason. But okay, Stack Overflow is dope. So I use roll of list and I go through and make divs with list item, list item, list item, list item. Okay, it's still going to properly function, but we can see the cracks in the foundation starting to happen, where I'm going to get too much stuff in here from an ARIA standpoint and things are going to start breaking, right? And at the same time, don't forget, this lovely div button is still down here hanging out for some reason because we decided not to fix it, okay? So now we get through iteration 2, all right? So we've got the image, we've got the header, we've got the details underneath, we've got select item, all right? And here comes the kicker. Team change happens all the time. So developers that are working on this, guess what they do? They leave. They go out and save the world, do something else. So now I hire 2 new devs who are added to my team. And those 2 devs, guess what? Came from that same set of education piece I was talking about before, where they have no idea what HTML is. I know React, I know Angular, I'm great, I'll come in. Awesome. So now I have two new developers on the team with little to no accessibility experience coming in to pick up the slop of code that I have, right? So we go on. Iteration 3 comes in, which is a new feature request. So now whoever's controlling this company has gone bananas and says, hey, I just want to start adding in some cool stuff to make it look dope across the board. Awesome. So the styling is being asked to be updated again. The requirements are to do the following. Remove the standard look of the list dots that are there with new custom CSS. Make the button into an image instead of just plain text that says select item, and include the number of lightsabers that are left. So similar to what you see with like Amazon, where it's like, hey, there's only a few of these items left. So before I even get to the next slide, because the code chunk is going to take up the whole screen at this rate when I show you all, let's talk about the outcome. So again, visually, this is what I got. I've got my Obi-Wan Kenobi lightsaber on the left. I've got my heading in the middle with Obi-Wan Kenobi lightsaber, my horizontal row, and now each individual item, the three items underneath, have a star to the left because we're Star Wars and we got to add stars somewhere to this, right? So an emoticon of stars are to the left. In between the select item button, which is now add to cart, there's red text in bold that says only two left. And now on the far right, the button that says select item has turned into an image button that has a cart on the left and add to cart in text. And yes, it is an image of text, just so everybody knows. Okay, I hope everybody takes a deep breath with me before we see the last bit of code. All right. Ta-da! Wow. Okay, so we have officially hit the tangled web of ARIA. Holy hell. What do we even do with this? And where do I even start explaining this to y'all? Because in that short time frame, all we did was change the styling to the bullets, add one piece of text in Millis red, and change the button. That should be relatively simplistic for us to get to, right? Okay, so let's start from the top. We chose to use, with our section, a row of list. And inside that, I add a div class of row, but I add this span with a class of dot to put those dots in. Immediately, my semantics are broken from an ARIA perspective, right? If you were to use an automated tool, it would call this out in 2 seconds and say there's something that's inside a row of lists that's not a list item. Done. Okay? It's already broken. For all 3 of the list items, I have already broken the semantics for it inside of it. And yes, before anyone says anything, you could use a role presentation, but these are new devs. They don't know any better. So they're like, cool, I'm going to add this in. Great, accessible, looks fantastic, right? So that's part 1. Part 2, remember our lovely heading up top that had Obi-Wan Kenobi's name? Well, this new dev came in and just said, well, you know what? That styling looks the same. And there's this stuff that said role of heading and ARIA level. I don't really know what that means. So I'm just going to copy and paste it because it must have been important. So I'll now put that down low with the rest of this text down here and just add the class of red to it so that it turns red, but role of heading ARIA level 4 is there. Okay, now I have 2 headings in a small component. What? That doesn't make any sense, right? But again, they don't know any better. They think it's needed, so they pull that in, right? And they run with it. And then finally, my lovely button at the end down here. So I still have this div. Roll a button, tab index of 0. Class is button, listing button. The ARIA label says select item button. Oh, but wait a minute, Mark. Didn't the button before say add to cart? Oh yeah, it did. Because we didn't add an image alt. We left the ARIA label alone because we don't know any better from accessibility perspective. So guess what's going to read? Select item button and add to cart is what's going to be visible. So welcome to ARIA Soup and a Tangled Web of ARIA. This story that I've just walked through is one that I have seen way too often. Development teams don't know HTML, don't know the basics of it, and instead search for accessibility solutions, whether it's through Stack Overflow, different sites, an AI generator, doesn't matter. But we end up getting back to the same point that proper HTML and ARIA do need to meet and marry together. But we don't do that because we're not doing the fundamentals from the beginning, right? And it can be extremely hard for any developer to be able to pick this up and fully understand what the hell's been done to even make this accessible from the beginning, right? I bashed on the two new devs we got to that dev team, but here's the thing. They don't know the wiser. They think what was developed before them was correct because, yeah, why would my company that's doing this put together something that's inaccessible and this is needed? So I'm going to copy and paste this and use it. Happens all the time. It does. And so it's not a knock on them. I mean, it can be because we can say, hey, you should learn semantics and learn accessibility, but they get thrown to the fire and they're the ones that have to deal with it and go with it from there, right? So let's build this damn thing correctly just so everybody can see this, okay? If we were to build this using semantic and native HTML, the code is so much smoother, cleaner. There's purpose to it. Everyone can understand what each item is supposed to do. So if I go through from top to bottom, right? If I look at the heading level, that was the issue before with the Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber. Now I have an H4 in place, right? Simple. Take all of that span, all of that row of heading in place, it's there, right? And yes, I changed it to an H4 because the team decided to at the last second. If I look at my list, OL, LI, 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 OL, done. All of that soup that we saw before, I will tell everybody it was almost, I think, 34 lines of code, shrink down to 4 with CSS and proper HTML. The pieces down below with the div classes with the only 2 left. Now I use the proper span with a class of red alert to do that. And I don't have a developer pulling a heading to pull that in because my heading is proper and they say, oh, I should be using something else for this done. And my button is a button, right? So if somebody does make a mistake and puts an on-click event to it, it should work, although I would say still have a key down event for it. And my image has the alt text of add to cart with the proper sourcing. Done. I went from 72 lines almost of code down to probably less than 30-ish lines of code just for that. And yes, I might be on a little bit of a diatribe here of code, all of that, but building things with native and semantic HTML, one makes your code cleaner and easier to maintain, but it also helps in ensuring that your content remains accessible from time being. If you want to build a culture of accessibility, you have to build from the ground up using the foundational pieces of HTML to do so. So just reiterating, the problems with ARIA first development, it just leads to bad HTML coding practices. I mean, I hate to say it, but the amount of code that's out there is with HTML, it's just bad. It's just unreal. Taking the time to learn the semantics is what's needed to fix it. Not only that, creates the messy markup that we just talked about, where we get into a giant div soup. We don't know what does what, and we have new developers come in that trade off and say, I know this piece, I'm going to go to it and just copy and paste. It can cause more accessibility issues than it helps fix. How about that? You just saw that in that scenario with how many issues that were introduced over it just because we decided to use ARIA first. And it doesn't build for long-term sustainability. Just like I said, semantic and native HTML does. Using ARIA first to build out div soup and span soup is not going to be the solution that you need. You have to use semantic and native HTML to build that foundation and use ARIA to supplement and enhance. Back to the lovely definition of ARIA, right? So you might be asking yourself, Mark, we're what, 35 minutes into this talk? That's great. I'm up here barking and moaning about how development teams don't do HTML first. How, all this stuff. How would I deal with it? Well, it's lucky that you asked because accessible coding practices are things that I have personally been just talking about since I got into accessibility is how do you get accessibility into coding reviews, standards, automated testing, all of that, right? And a lot of times there's the stigma in the community. I say the community as a whole, not accessibility community, but development community, that accessibility takes too much time, right? It's too much. I can't learn it. It's too much to learn. And I'm going to take more time from it, blah, blah, blah. Baloney. If you take these 3 practical steps on a development team and start adding them in, you will see a switch from a culture that doesn't care about accessibility practices and the basics to a culture that does, right? So let's dive into these three really quick. Accessible coding standards. So accessible coding standards, I'll go to that again, coding standards help development teams ensure that all their web content is to ensure development teams are including accessibility as part of their day-to-day dev, and it helps reinforce the importance of accessibility. Now, when we talk about a standard, what I'm getting at is something as simple as we use native and semantic elements. Stop. If you want a quick win, start there. Or we adhere to WCAG 2.1, and here's the information for how we do that, right? If you want to get even more simplistic, start with the HTML. That's it, right? Start with the basic uses of HTML and enforce that in coding standards. But also, even with the standard practices too, enforcing and letting your teams learn accessibility. I always have a phrase of like using 10 minutes a day to learn some accessibility. In your standards, in the practices you have, if you build a standard that says we want to learn accessibility, build accessibility within our coding practices, you open the door to people wanting to know more. That's how I got into accessibility. When I learned about accessibility, I was like, hey, I want to know more. And that opened my door. We're not asking everybody to become Mark Steadman. That would be unwise of us, but at least get them the awareness of we have a standard for accessibility and here's what it is. And like I said, even if it's as basic as we use semantic and native HTML versus div soup, that's a starting point, right? We're not asking everybody to change the world today. We just want to get the basics done. If we start something small like that, it can move into ARIA coding practices versus no accessibility issues versus down the line, okay? So that's what we talk about when we say accessible coding standard. Now, accessible code reviews. I think I've talked through this 10 million different times at conferences, and sometimes I get people that are just like, I don't know what you mean. All those scenarios where dev 1, dev 2, and then the new devs committed code. If we have an accessibility standard that says we're enforcing semantic native HTML over ARIA, ensuring ARIA patterns are used, and ensure there's accessible coding patterns, guess what? When somebody reviews your code, they are now on their system and guard to say that's our standard. We need to change this. So that first commit going all the way back to the top of the scenario, when they say and put in the code that was a div for a button, a reviewer can say, nope, that needs to be a native button, remove all this garbage, and we need these things. Done. I know in practice that code reviews sometimes are kind of ho-hummed around of like, well, nobody really takes them seriously. I understand that. But if we use code reviews to enforce these practices, the ARIA patterns, accessible coding patterns, right? We can change the way things are written really quickly. And so even a simple just comment on a pull request that goes in for code that says, hey, like, you're using a row of heading and ARIA level. This needs to be an H1, H2, H3, use a native heading. Goes a long way to starting to enforce that developer to say, oh yeah, I need to use semantic elements first. Got it. Okay, I'm not just going to do that, right? And we don't end up way down the path of div soup and ARIA hell for it too. So accessible code reviews matter, and putting them into principle, putting them into action really starts to enforce that accessibility culture. And lastly, automated testing. Now, mind you, in the world that we're in with the AI boom, all those pieces for automation, I'm going to be the first one to tell you, I'm an automation advocate for accessibility, but I'm also a realist. It can only be used to catch the lower third of accessibility issues before content is pushed to production or test, right? But I do want to say it does have its benefits to getting people to switch their mindset of accessibility matters. So for example, accessibility testing libraries like Axe Core that exist out there, testing for accessibility issues in the unit or integration tests of content. So if I do that code review, and let's say I still push code through or somebody just happens to miss it, right? Like one of my ARIA pieces are in there. If I commit and then my test case is run, some, just saying some, not all, of the ARIA practices can be caught with automation. And then guess what? I end up with some issues that come back, and my team is at least aware at the very minimum that accessibility matters, right? If you want to take it even further, and I tried to get through this talk without saying shift left, but I'm going to say it. If you want to shift accessibility even farther left, linters. I know linters can only catch even probably less than the third that's on there from an accessibility perspective. However, guess what? It will enforce those practices from accessibility perspective as a developer code. So for example, when ARIA label is used on a button that already has a label, it will probably be like, hey, you're duplicating these things. What are you doing? Right? Or if you do like what Mark Steadman does and can't type on a keyboard, because I love to typo nonstop and my team would tell you that in 2 seconds, you might put ARIA label and misspell it, right? It'll let you know that you're using an incorrect ARIA attribute. You misspelled this. You're not using the right one. That's accessibility checks. I know I just have that on the screen for the slide, but I'm going to tell you all this too. There are native and semantic checkers as well. They're not used enough and they need to be. If you leave here with it, please leave with that. There are semantic and native HTML checkers that are out there too that will enforce some of those coding practices that I mentioned in the previous slide. So I can say, hey, I have a roll up button, and it will call out and say, hey, should you be using a native button instead? Right? Linters have been seen for the longest time as not useful from an accessibility perspective. And I'm telling you all, they have value. It might be minuscule, and we as accessibility experts might think it's minuscule, but put it in front of a team that does not know anything, and it is a massive explosion of holy crap, we are doing things wrong really quick, right? So keep that in mind as you start looking at it from a linter's perspective, but also just automated testing in general is a great foot in the door to really get that culture of accessibility rolling within your team. So bringing it all home, because Mark has just been talking nonstop, and I feel like just judging by the chat, there's going to be a bunch of questions for me at the end of this. If you leave here with anything, I want to leave with 3 points, and I want to make sure they hit them home. I hit them home really hard. HTML matters. In a day and age where everything is moving at a lightning pace, everything seems to be moving to the next thing. At the end of the day, no matter what we do and build in the website of things, guess what it's built with? Hypertext markup language. How about that? So it matters. It does. And those key principles and the key foundational pieces of semantic native HTML, they ain't going anywhere. So knowing those and building those are a big key to making the internet more accessible. I also say take time to educate developers on accessibility. It kind of goes back to accessibility coding standards, but I will say being able to educate developers on accessibility is something that we don't take the time to do in this day and age. So being able to tell them, even from a simplistic standpoint of using something like automation, to be able to open a link and say, hey, what is this issue and what am I doing wrong from an accessibility perspective? Giving them the time and tools to be able to learn accessibility and be aware of it is better than the state we're in right now, right? I told you all I did this talk for the first time 4 years ago, and I could tell you that it's probably the same, if not worse, where it's at now. And so trying to educate developers on accessibility is going to be key for all of us going forward. Whether it's these AI agents that people want to type prompts into, or it's, Stack Overflow having incorrect information, things like that. We have to take time to educate developers on accessibility to be aware of the content they're making. The last piece is enforce accessibility practices on your teams. Now, some of you may not be directly involved with like development teams, so maybe at your organization, maybe across the world you advocate, but enforcing accessibility practices does one big thing. Well, I'll say two big things. One, it just makes your devs give a damn about what they make. Back to the first point of how quickly things move in this day and age. A lot of times we just want to get things out the door to get things out the door. And the pride of taking something and building something that's actually accessible and works for everybody is kind of lost. And so making sure that we give a damn about the stuff we make matters, right? On top of that, it builds a culture of accessibility within your development team, right? So even starting with the most simplistic thing of code reviews or automation you're taking the first footsteps into building that culture of accessibility that will grow and grow and grow over time, right? And so doing those things help us avoid this entire ARIA tangled web that we have out into the world right now and brings it back down to the three core things we need to do to get us out of that and really get back to the basics to make the web more accessible. So with that, I say thank you. That is my presentation. I will bow and I will take questions.
Mark, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've got several questions here coming into the Q&A, so I'm glad that we've got some time to begin. Lots of reactions. Fantastic talk, as always. Let's see, we'll go up and I'll start from the beginning. I'll kind of may have to skip through depending on how much time we have, but one of the first clarifying questions, sorry if this has been said, I've noticed that sometimes alt text for images has been called ARIA in some websites. Is it one and the same thing?
No. So yeah, that's a really good question. So alt text, alternative text for images is different than like ARIA on there. Alt text is an attribute that's tied specifically to an image, an image, an image. Geez, Louise, tag itself. I can't think. I've been talking too long. And ARIA itself is separate attributes that go on to all elements, right? So you can use an ARIA label on an image, but an image already has an alt attribute that you can use to put what the purpose of the image is or describe the image itself.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Yeah, that was a good question, just to be sure.
Yeah,
Next
absolutely.
one, you've got some reinforcement. Absolutely agree with what you're saying. And then the question part is, recently I had to overhaul a very, very old site with WAI support, WCAG AA level. When you're encountering a legacy site like that, but you're sometimes at the mercy of layouts that are beyond the pale, parenthetical note, it's an unhappy mix of Twig and legacy Vue.js. Have you found
Yep.
instances where the only solutions are, frankly, hacky at best?
Oh, 110%. Yes. So I will tell it's a legit question. I know I'm on like my high horse on here being like, yeah, we got to get down to native HTML, all that, but do understand in my experience, I've worked with multiple different sites. I've worked with legacy code, new code, code sometimes. I always call it like ninjaing with ARIA, right? If you do it in the right way and you know what you're doing, you can ninja things in with ARIA and fix them, and just get the pieces in play that you need to. Again, to a user, they're not going to know the difference unless you do ARIA incorrectly for the content. I've also done, and I will make sure that everybody gets this piece on here. It's not an overlay piece. I've used JavaScript to go in and set some ARIA attributes or fix some of the code in there as well for legacy sites, specifically for the issues that were there, just to fix some of the core issues that were on there. Because either I didn't have access to the code or the team didn't, right? Like they didn't have access to old code to be able to go and fix. So there are practical reasons, especially for older applications, to use ARIA within reason, as long as you know what you're doing and you're not trying to like totally, div soup it up or anything like that, but there are reasons to use ARIA on legacy sites and even JavaScript to do some of that as well.
Well, it's the first rule of ARIA, right? I mean, use ARIA when you can't pull it off with HTML, and there are times when there's no
Correct.
other path.
Yeah,
I like
correct.
this question
100%.
quite a bit. This is like foreshadowing to a talk we're going to have, I think, later on today about designers and working with designers and ARIA and such.
Yeah.
Let me scroll back up to it. It went away. What are your thoughts on
Yep.
designers who don't use any coding apps, specify ARIA in their wireframes and mockups in Figma context? I train designers on
Cool.
accessibility, and some ask why I don't train them to specify ARIA in their mockups.
Yep. It goes back to the age-old piece. So I will give an example of when I was a dev and I always got like design handoffs from designers, right? My instinct, because the team that I was on was always to go back and talk with the designer, ask them what they're trying to get with it and like what pieces they wanted, right? And this was before like the Figma boom and all that stuff now, but the one piece that I would suggest is we can do something to get designers to use annotations and not necessarily put things on there like, hey, this should have an ARIA label. A friend of mine actually was just talking to me the other day about this actually exact same thing where they were confused about, hey, similar to the scenario that I talked through in this, where they had an image button coming through and they're like, hey, I don't know as I'm going through this, like, should I annotate this and say this is ARIA label equals this, or is this text coming through? And so I think it's similar to like the education piece that I talked about before too, where it's educating both developers from a standpoint of making sure they ask the question to designers to get clarification, and designers get clarification of like, hey, this is what a native HTML element can do versus just trying to aria it up along the way, right? So there's two sides of a coin for it. And I'm not trying to answer the question for the next talk we have in this too, but I think being able to educate both sides of the house and understanding when when you need to use ARIA and when you don't is a big deal. And it does hit, I know this is strictly focused on developers, but it does hit home on both sides of the house too for designers and developers.
Yeah,
If that
yeah,
kind of answers
absolutely.
it. Sorry.
No, no, that's great. That's great. Thanks. Um, so the next one, this is interesting. This is a Safari issue, or maybe it is. Recently learned that Safari plus VoiceOver does not announce stylized list tags as list unless they have an explicit role equal lists. Are there other cases like this?
Holy guacamole. You would have me on that one. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I will say, if anybody ever has any questions for what is supported by what, there is an allysupport.io site that is open source. A couple people run it. Inside of there, there's a lot of answers of like what ARIA attributes, what things are supported by different assistive technologies like partial, not, all of that. So if you ever have any questions on that, that's a great resource to go to for everybody on here to know like what pieces are supported by different screen readers and not. That case, I'm not fully aware of that one. To be honest with you, I haven't used VoiceOver and Safari in a long time for this too. But yeah, my suggestion would be if you ever run into things like that, use the allysupport.io site to see if what the support is for it, and also like is it partial, is it not, and is there another way around it, because it's a really good resource.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, and thanks to everybody who's dropped that into the chat. Um, Question about why on click in a button that fails WCAG 252 pointer cancellation.
Say that one more time.
Why put an on click event handler in a button that
Mhm.
the assertion then is that fails WCAG 252 pointer cancellation.
Oh yeah, so with this behind the scenes, that was just a very simplistic example. I wasn't trying to say like we put on clicks or on key down events or anything like that on it. I was just using a very simplistic example for it, just so everybody knows like behind the scenes. So yeah, that would be pointer cancellation with it as well. Again, just to bring it home, a lot of the on click pieces are behind the scenes and not in JavaScript specific, or sorry, not on the element specifically. And so I was just trying to pull those forward as an example for it. But
Okay.
yes, to the
Okay.
point,
Cool.
100%.
Okay. Um, so here's a good question from someone who readily admits, I'm not a developer, I'm a content manager. What do you recommend people in my type of position do to start learning more about this?
Ooh. Oh, that's a good question and a loaded question. So I'll be very simplistic. If we're talking about learning accessibility and getting leveled up on it, two things as far as like getting yourself going from accessibility perspective. I always say the best thing to do is one, start the education practice. That doesn't mean just like going out and being like, I'm going to go on courses and start learning. Get yourself signed up for newsletters. There's Alley Weekly. It's out there. Get accessibility information coming to you nonstop. Um, the other piece of it is I'm going to go back to the automation piece. I know it's content, but the content comes out. Use automation. So use some browser extensions and things like that to actually get, so the Wave tool, Axe Dev Tools is out there, Microsoft Insights. I mean, some of them, for the most part, all use the same rules engine behind the scenes. Start to educate yourself from accessibility perspective around that, um, and really get some of the issues in. And then from that, from the issues that you learn, start to figure out where those gaps are, right? A lot of teams have come to me and people have come to me in the past and kind of asked, like, hey, how do I get started? Either I'm not directly involved in code or I'm, similar to this, like in content. And I always start with use something to identify issues and then start to educate yourself on where those gaps are in my content management system or in the work that I'm doing, and then it can trickle into the devs and people that have the work from there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And folks had some good suggestions there as well to take a look at something like DQU.
Yep.
Some
Yep.
suggestions to just simple language, understanding content and context. And there's some good suggestions typed in there as well. A suggestion in the chat too. Screen readers have been helpful for me showing non-code people stuff, and I think that's
Yeah.
another good tool. Bearing in mind you've
Absolutely.
got a learning curve with a screen reader, right? So there's a
100%.
little bit to
Yep.
do there.
Yep. Yep. And 100%, just so everybody knows. If I had a last bullet point, this wasn't focused on just like the little pieces, I would say educate developers on screen reader usage, how to use it, how to navigate with it, all of that, because that's the end goal, right? So you have everybody who understands how a screen reader works and functions. This is more just focused on the little pieces of getting rid of ARIA, but on the whole, if you can get developers, even product owners, scrum masters, all of them to understand, right, how to use screen, how to navigate with it, it's a great asset to have, and it helps them be able to self-test their own content too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't, we always say in our training, you don't have to be an expert, right?
Yeah.
If you're not going to be using this tool daily, there are really just a few handsful of keyboard shortcuts on the Windows side or stuff in the rotor on VoiceOver that you need to
Yep.
know to get a lot of insight about accessibility. So it
Yeah.
can be intimidating, but
Yep.
we try to temper that expectation. Like, don't
Yeah.
set yourself up as I'm going to be an expert screen reader user. That you can learn quite a bit well
Yeah.
before you're at that point.
Yep.
I like this one, and I think you being in the role that you're in, you probably have been part of managing this before. Question is, how do you balance the tension between accessibility and quote unquote innovation during the creative process?
Oh boy. It's so I'll just share the general thought is always that accessibility tampers down innovation, it tampers down creativity, all of that stuff. And the way that I always frame it is if we're going to get innovative and we're going to get creative, why can't it be for everyone? Why does it have to just be for the person who's making it or for one group of people, right? And using using it in a way, using accessibility in a way that frames it for everyone, right? I think everybody gets caught up in this, and I think everybody who's heartying and clapping right now will agree with this here in a second too, is we get caught up and so focused on like one specific persona or person that we're like making things for. And if we change the mindset to everyone, then that tampered down of like, oh, I can't innovate or oh, I can't use um, my creativity goes out the window a bit more, right? So framing accessibility a little bit different for all users, right? Versus getting so zoned in on like one specific type of user or persona helps in that conversation as well. But also just taking, I will say this, also just taking simple steps of meeting people where they are, right? So I say that like I use this development team one as an example, but doing small steps to meet them where they're at to kind of get accessibility built into it to show we're not asking you to reinvent the world for the things you're doing, right? We're just asking you to do small things. Those small changes, those small things, they add up over time, right? And then you start to get everyone to understand, okay, hey, the accessibility teams aren't just coming in here to be like, hey, we need you to redo all this stuff. This is horrible. No, we're coming in logically clean to say, hey, we just want you to build for everybody, right? And here's simple things you can do, and then those grow over time, right? That would be my stance back to it.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. I like that quote about, if we're going to be creative for some, let's be creative for everybody. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that would resonate pretty well with at least, some of your devs and such. I think we have time maybe for one more since we got started a couple
Sure.
minutes late. And there
Yeah.
are really good questions in the Q&A. Thank you all for using the Q&A. Sorry, we're not going to be able to get to them. Well, the first quick question is, do you want to share your slide deck? Is it posted somewhere that you
Yes.
want to share?
I will host it somewhere because I just updated the slides. Don't go to my old one. My old one is so bad.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
obsessed
So
with clearances. I'll get
we'll
this
email
hosted.
everybody when with the
Sounds
updated
good.
deck. The last question that I'll
Sounds good.
grab from the Q&A. If wait, where to go? It's screening. Can you share about your understanding of role equal application? I see people online saying never to use it, but for things like interactive web maps, it seems really important. With pop-ups for
Yeah.
interactive maps, I use role equal document to switch screen readers back to reading mode.
Yep. So that's that role equals application for the longest time was being misused, and that's probably where that's coming from. Is for example, I saw sites probably 6, 7 years ago when you went to like the main body of the application, it would put role equals application, right? And that switches the whole context for how a screen reader is going to interact with it because it's expecting an application that has different commands, things like that on the page itself, right? So if you're going to use application, it really has a specific use case for it. And off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact definition for it. So I'm going to apologize for person who asked that question. But switching between contexts is making sure that you need the role of application for the content and you know and understand that it is going to change the way that a user using Screen Reader behaves with the site itself, and ensuring one more time that you have the proper semantic structure in place so you can switch back between a document mode and an application mode on there too. But that's probably where we're seeing the pushback on like don't use it because it's been misused because people think, hey, I have a web application, therefore role equals application, right? And it's like, oh, no, 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 no. That just made my whole site inaccessible from that standpoint.
Yeah, right, right. And I think there's more refinement and understanding in the dev community about where to apply these roles where it actually is useful, as opposed to like you talked about with, multiple ARIA labels and stuff that it always seems well intentioned when I encounter it, right? It
Yeah.
just doesn't always work out that well. Um, let's do one brief when you talk about some automated accessibility testing tools
Yep.
in a different context. But what are some of the favorites that you use or that you might recommend for people who are, in that earlier stage in their accessibility journey?
Yep. So anything that basically has an Axe core engine behind it. So Axe DevTools is a really good one for browser extension. There's Microsoft Insights. I would say the Wave tool is one of the ones that's a go-to. Wave has got accessibility testing behind it, not just automation, but some manual checks too, as well. If you're talking, linters, there for any of the JavaScript frameworks and testing frameworks you have, there's always linters out there that will have accessibility rules built into them. So like Java, I'm going to say this wrong, but React JSX has one that's out there that has accessibility rules tied into it. You just have to turn them on. And then from a testing side of things for like integration testing, I'll tell you, there's a multitude of different things you could use. I actually have an automated accessibility example library that's out there that I maintain from a web perspective. So if you have like Playwright, Cypress, different integrations that you use from a regression standpoint, I have examples of integrations for them out there for everyone to use. But the basic thing I'll get to with it is whatever tool you choose, make sure you're consistent in the rule sets and the tools that you're using. So you're not using one tool that has a holistically different rule set than the other. Because if you're using it and you go through like layers, like developers all the way up to integration, you want to make sure your data is consistent, right? And ensure that that data that you're getting back is consistent for everybody.